walk in to a payday loan place, especially as Val said, looking like a politician, not a real person, they probably won't give me an application to take home. Yet, they're preying on those that are most vulnerable. In large measure, what I would hope to do, and what I intend to do, first and foremost, is propose rate cap legislation. I mean, credit unions and the like are starting to do some good work on this and make a revolving loan fund for those that most need it. But assuming that doesn't work out, I think that we do need to have a serious discussion about rate caps. I don't think that we had that serious discussion last legislative session because in part, there weren't the stories of the financial devastation that occurred. It wasn't necessarily presented to the legislature. And failing that, if we can't all come together, industry, consumers, nonprofits, on a reasonable rate cap, there are other states that are taking enforcement actions, and they're largely consumer protection actions. I mean, it's a tough thing because often those that are most needed, that's the lender of last resort. But there's also some statutes and laws that say this can't be a repetitive cycle. But I've spoken to people that got into that cycle, and it's turned time and time and time again. And for the $1,000 loan, all of a sudden they paid $4,000. And even though I put myself through law school on credit cards, the interest rate was only 18%, not the 400% that they can charge. So I think that that is an active and important part of consumer protection.
My question is, do you have any programs for youth that you're proposing? Are they on your website, for instance? And how do you think that would further nonprofits who are supporting you?
Do I have any programs just specifically like what would my goals and objectives be?
Well, those that specifically to counteract the crimes, the drugs, all the things that you get into.
Yeah, and there's so much, I mean, there is so much that the Attorney General, within the realm of here's what the Attorney General does, I mean, can do. I mean, we have 250 troopers on our highways. We have 2 state officers on this information superhighway. Notwithstanding the fact we know right now that 20% of kids are sexually solicited online, 47% are bullied. All they can do is forensic work. I think the Attorney General can take an active on the law enforcement part, both an education standpoint, coordinating the resources that we have all over, and the door-to-door salesmen that are taking, you know, they used to be going to sell a new roofing program that's now actually going through the inbox. People are being taken on a regular basis. So working on that playground is one area. I think largely what the Attorney General can and should do is say, what are the challenges that I'm going to face over the next 8 years, or we're going to face as a community, and how can we best address those challenges? One thing I've spoken about some is meth. I mean, meth is horrible. We've got to keep, and we need to be vigilant. 6 people died from methamphetamine overdoses last year. 141 died from the top 4 prescription drugs in Montana. We know that we are 3rd per capita in the country for adolescents abusing these drugs. 10% of our adolescents, this is now becoming their drug of choice. We can do more legislatively through a prescription monitoring program. Another part is an education program, because kids are also getting these from my medicine cabinet, the proverbial my medicine cabinet, yours, that they usually get them from their friends and their neighbors. There's a lot more that we can do in that area too. There's some on my, I talked briefly about the mentoring program. There's pieces that sort of helping law enforcement, our educational communities, work in a constructive manner together better. There's always concern about sexual and violent offenders. There are things that we can do in that respect. Part of the kids program is also making sure that domestic abuse can be a pattern, and we need to stop it at the start. We need to make sure that domestic abuse occurring in front of children is that much more egregious and problematic. With sexual and violent offenders, we need to make sure that individuals have the opportunities, I mean, that our prosecutors have the tools they need. Those can be things like we have in a Billings or a Helena, we have great prosecutors doing that kind of work, but that's a sensitive thing, and in Sweetgrass County, they may not necessarily. There's children's justice centers that were just set up in the last, after in Helena, Missoula, and Butte, maybe Hamilton as well, that saw 500 kids last year. And that's trying to take law enforcement, the treatment community, folks making it much more easier for them to testify and to get through this horrific process that we call the legal process. I think that we're one of 6 states that don't provide any sort of background checks for our direct care providers for our elderly. So I think that there are a number of different areas when we look at the quality of life issues and how quality of life ties with law enforcement that the Attorney General can play an active role. And I hope ultimately that, it's funny because if I'm so lucky to get elected, I get elected sworn in January 1st, and there comes the legislature. So you can't necessarily have the perfect program your first year. But hopefully, if what this job really is to serve in the public interest, the pieces of what I will be able to do within the context of this law enforcement lawyer job will come from you and your agendas and serve the public interest. Because you're the ones that are dealing with a lot of the issues that all face on a day-to-day basis.
Steve. Thank you.
I wish I got that sort of applause every time I got up to speak. Usually it's 15 minutes, Steve.
I'm Billy Lee from Lake County. And one of the things that was pointed out to me, as you know, counties have just been through their budgeting process, and cities and towns. And in the prosecuting offices and in for the attorney's offices, the county attorneys, etc., one of the things that was brought out was the difficulty in getting the appropriate case tracking software and this type of thing that is so needed out as a resource out in the counties, but is so cost prohibitive. And the question that I was asked to ask you is if there are plans that the state's attorney's office could put in for sharing and cross-sharing the basic infrastructure of law enforcement that needs to be out to the county areas.
I appreciate the question. I think the answer is ultimately yes. Now, beyond that, though, it gets a little bit more complex because ideally your prosecutor's office should also be able to talk to your court system. They're talking about this Hope Card project right now. And what that is that an individual could immediately get a little card that says, here are the terms and conditions of a restraining order. And then they could just show that to law enforcement. Let's go one example. But we need to have our court system and the criminal justice system working together. And we need to do that within 56 counties where you have some counties and county attorneys that will say, I don't even trust the computer. I'm not sure about any sort of organized effort. But so it is a little bit like herding cats. But with that said, I mean, what we're talking about then is what are the challenges, what are the things that we face in the next 8 years. It would make it substantially more efficient for all parties. For the victims, for the prosecutors, for the court system, to get the technology and the tracking systems in place. And I think that is an area where once we can marshal all those parties together, it makes a lot more sense to buy, one Volkswagen as opposed to 56. And we could use that opportunity then that when locals are also asking the legislature for money and saying, here are the efficiency savings, here are things like that. I think my experience when I was lobbying up there on behalf of the department is that helps a lot. I guess I'm done.